Wow. Hey, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. We're gonna get into this book right away. First, before we get into the tree and the genealogy, this book right here says The Calvin Families, Origin and History of the American Calvins with a Partial Genealogy by Claude W. Calvin, seventh generation from John Calvin of Dartmouth, Massachusetts. All right, so remember that. This is from 1945. And we belly flop to page 28 of this book. We're going to go to the second paragraph down here. It says John Calvin of Dartmouth and the New England Calvins and Colvins. All right. It says the date on which this first Calvin to reach New England arrived from across the Atlantic is not definitely known, for it's the name of the ship on which he came, or Norris, sorry. But it might pop up the records, right? I believe this guy was an indentured servant when he came in. None of the compiled lists of early immigrants to New England contains his name. Explanation for this is found in the family tradition that this first ancestor of the family in New England ran away while a boy and his teens and stowed away on a ship at Bristol, England, which was about to sail for the Plymouth Bay colony in America. It is related that, having been left an orphan at an early age, he had been placed by a guardian in an apprenticeship, or indenture, apprenticeship by a guardian, What guardian? Give us names. These could be family members. We're going to get a whole backstory where he was badly treated and that this was his reason for leaving. On being discovered a couple of days after the vessel had set sail, he was put to work as a cabin boy and thus arrived in due course at Plymouth. All right. Circumstances indicate that the year of his arrival was about 1670 or shortly thereafter, possibly because the vessel on which he came sailed from Bristol. That city has been sometimes given as his birthplace. All right, because he was coming from there, there's a lot of confusion whether he was English or from somewhere else, but he was just coming from there. He was not actually born there. But this is evidently conjecture, for which there is no other foundation. And according to one version of the tradition, he was really a native of Glasgow, Scotland. That's where he's actually from. He's Scottish. And had made his way from that city to Bristol in order, undoubtedly, heard, Bristol having been the port from which all sailings for the American colonies were then made. And we have a whole book showing you Bristol had a very, very large free people of color population, possibly more than so-called white. Nothing is known of our John's parents, all right, but as according to the tradition, a guardian had been appointed for him. They may have been people of some consequence, and as heretofore pointed out, if he did in fact come from Glasgow, he may have been a descendant, listen, of one of the early Calvin refugees at Geneva. Wasn't John Calvin the reformer, the Protestant? Wasn't he from Geneva, ended up in France? Some of whom it is believed may have gone to Scotland prior to 1600, as these Geneva Calvins included Samuel and David Calvin. We'll see who that is in the tree. Nephews of John Calvin the Reformer. All right, nephews of John Calvin, the real John Calvin. We just did a video about him, right? Crypto.Jew, Sephardic Moorish Jew, the Calvins Cohen, Johannes Cohen, the Reformer, That's based on the Bible, Old Testament. Our Plymouth-bound cabin boy may have been a descendant of one of these sons of Antoine Calvin. And he, in fact, is. I'm going to show you that. Younger brother of the great reformer himself. So this David and this John Calvin, who ended up in Dartmouth, Massachusetts, is a descendant of the brother of John Calvin, the Protestant, the reformer, the crypto-Jew. So these are crypto Sephardic Jewish family, right? It's the same people. However, as previously suggested, the Massachusetts arrival may have been a descendant of the Huguenot refugee. Huguenot. Who's the Huguenots, huh? We just went over this too, right? With John Calvin, Huguenots, many of them Muslim Moors, Sephardic Jews, they have fled. The Inquisition from Spain and Portugal ended up in Lower France, becoming known as Huguenots. And they were one of the biggest followers of John Calvin, the same people. So he may have been a descendant of Jean Calvin, who arrived in Geneva from Provence in the south of France in 1555, and is believed to have later removed to Canterbury, England, where his daughter Perron was married in 1594. In addition to this daughter, there may also have been one or more sons from our Bristol immigrant could have been descended. This, of course, is conjecture, but if true, it would make our young John a descendant of the real Calvins of southern France. Examination of early English records, when they again become accessible, may throw some added light on the subject. The young immigrant probably stayed for a time at Plymouth. Probably. They don't know all the details, but later went to Dartmouth, one of the Plymouth-based settlements, where he may have located about 1675. He was doubtless living at Dartmouth when he married Dorothy Allen, daughter of Matthew Allen of Dartmouth, but the earliest definite record of him is the registration in the Dartmouth vital records of the births of his children, the first of whom was born March 26, 1679. Although the father's name was shown in these early Dartmouth records as John Colvin, convincing evidence has been found to indicate that the name was really Calvin in the first place, and recording the birth of his children. In 2 instances, their names were spelled Calvin, while in 2 others, the spellings Calvin was used, and a daughter of his oldest son, John Jr., was also later entered in the birth register with the spelling Calvin. This continued use of the spelling Calvin for the children when the father's name had been entered as Colvin rather tends to indicate that the error occurred in the spelling the father's name. All right, so yeah, it always goes back to Calvin. So continue a little ahead. It says here, John Calvin had 9 children. That is important because we're going to see these people in the tree. 5 sons, John Jr., Stephen, all right, Stephen, Samuel, James, and Joshua, and 4 daughters, Anna, Abigail, Amy, and Deborah. All right, you see all the Hebrew names and all that, right? Because, again, who are the Calvins? Crypto-Jews, all born in Dartmouth between 1679 and 1700. In 1705, the head of the family, by this time clearly a substantial citizen, bought 300 acres of land in the Providence Plantations in Rhode Island. All right, so we're going to leave it there in this book. We just wanted to go ahead and read that from their own family traditions and history. We're going to get the records now. We're going to go to the tree. All right, so we're back at Chief Oshkosh's family tree. If you guys remember, I just did a almost 4.5-hour video. I did so many people's lines in this one video and this one family. We did his great-granddaughter's tree, Alice Cecilia Oshkosh, born 1909, 1985. We're going to get a picture of her again, and her 2 husbands, as you guys can see, all supposed to be all prominent Indian families, but we actually went up both of them, and we found a lot of mixture, a lot of different things, not just 100% Indians. And it's okay. It's just to show that genealogy is very complex, and you have many, many ancestors. You got 64 fourth great grandparents. Imagine, do you know all of them? The Fredenbergs and Tortilot, right? So we did do the Fredenberg side. And again, this was a very prominent supposed Indian family in the Menominee, right? And this was her husband's parents. If you guys remember, Wayne Fredenberg. All right, so I just wanted to mention something before I started going up their line, the Fredenberg's line, is that the husband of Alice Cecilia Oshkosh, Wayne Fredenberg, the guy who line we're going to go up, his brother is William Ralph Fredenberg, and this is his image. This is where I got the cover, so you guys can see I didn't just grab a random person. This is what the Fredenberg, you know, at least his brother, the husband of the Oshkosh lady, looks like. Then I'm going to show you once again that these Fredenbergs, who, on the Indian census rolls and all that, aren't just Indians. This guy right here descends from John Calvin's family, his brother Antoine or Anthony Calvin. I'm going to prove it. I'm going to show you guys right now. Remember, she's an Indian. He married. He's an Indian. All these people are listed as Indian, but we saw the images. All right, go make sure to watch the video if you haven't. What we're gonna do is go up the Harper line. So her husband's mom's line, Verna May Harper, right? Verna May Harper. So as you guys can see, I'm not making any of this up. 1920 census, Vernie Fredenberg, Menominee Indian Reservation, race Indian Native American. Okay. And here she is in the U.S. Indian Census rolls, Fredenberg, Menominee Indian Reservation. And here is an image of your Indians. Hey, this is what they're saying. This is what I'm trying to tell you guys. So Vernie May Harper, Fredenberg Miller, Emmanuel Quabell, Levison, Hungenford. So one of them is Vernie May Harper. Do you see any Indians? Hey, if they have the genealogy, we did show a lot of the genealogy of the Fredenbergs, but we also showed a lot of the mixture that they had. Okay. Either way, I'll leave that up to you. All right. Either way, her parents are Frank George Harper, Annabelle Chicks. All right. Chicks. If you guys remember the Chicks part, because on the Harper side, I don't believe we got Indians, but on the Chicks side, we did have her dad, Jonah Chicks, and Catherine Jacobs. We go up the Chicks line. We have Joseph Chicks, born in New York. His wife, Isabel Dingley. We go up Joseph. Again, up the Chicks line, we got his dad, Jacob Chicks, Chitsung Sung Kung, and that goes to a famous chief, Jacob Chitsung Kung, Mohegan, I believe. Again, Mohegan, Indian, or Mohawk, if I remember. That's why you gotta go watch the video. But his mom, as you guys can see here, Hannah P. Calvin. Hannah P. Calvin, born in 1786, Berkshire, Massachusetts. So Hannah Chicks right here says Indian allotment general entry classification, huh? Getting some land for being an Indian or married to one. Different family trees have as Hannah W. Calvin, Bartholomew Scott, Chawis Kukling, Wilcraft Calvin. And we did this, and I didn't find no Calvin on his side. They were marrying Indian women, but not on that side. As you guys can see, many people have her as Calvin, many families, and you can verify this if you like. All right, and I told you guys when we were doing this tree and the live, her line specifically was popping up as we were going. All right, and we got her dad, Bartholomew Calvin, born in New Jersey. Scott Calvin, his dad, Stephen Calvin, 1738, in New Jersey. Hunterdon, his wife, Mary Storr. We keep going up the Calvin line. We got his dad, John Luther Calvin, Colvin, born 1705 in Shrewsbury, Monmouth, New Jersey. His wife, Elizabeth Warford. Remember, we did this the other day. And then his dad, Stephen Colvin, or Calvin, born in 1683, Dartmouth, Bristol, Massachusetts. Remember, who was ending up there with that name? It was John Calvin, or Calvin, from Glasgow, Scotland. Remember the story. We just got the story. We're going to read this entry right here. Let me just go, you guys. So we got this little paper right here, which is very informative when it comes to what they were missing in the book. And it says here, Colvin Calvin families. Now it says the Colvin Calvin family can be traced back to Gerard Calvin. Listen, 1454, 1531. Spelled at the time Calvin, or Calvin Cohen, Calvin Cohen, Calvin Cohen. He was the father of John Cohen, or Calvin the Reformer. Listen, so we are talking about the same people. 1509, 1564. John Calvin was the father of Calvinism and was one of the major figures of the Protestant Reformation with his brother Anthony Calvin, published the Geneva Bible. So Anthony helped him with that. The Geneva Bible was one of the Bibles of the Mayflower. Huh. The surname Calvin or Calvin was the French spelling of Calvin. Gerard changed it to Calvin, but in earlier English it was Colvin. The first Colvin, all right. This is the history right here we can trace. The first Calvin recorded in the New World was in New England, John Calvin, a direct descendant of John Calvin the Reformer. Listen, arrived at the Plymouth Bay colony about 1670 as a cabin boy. John Calvin, later Colvin, was born in Glasgow, Scotland in 1654. His mother, Janet Calvin, died when he was 11. His father, William Calvin, and his stepmother, Mary Craig, died at the same time in 1668, possibly of a plague when he was 14. So he was an orphan or just alone by the time he was 14. And this is a lot of the stories that most family historians are missing. They don't know nothing about his parents, but this one kind of makes sense because he ended up, you know, supposedly running away from his own uncle, because of the bad treatment, or maybe he was just shipped by his uncle as an indentured servant to the Americas. That was happening, or he was kidnapped. Little children were getting kidnapped. You guys remember that, right? As indentured servants. So again, his father. So he was born in Scotland again. His mother had died when he was 11. Just to repeat again, his father, William Calvin, and his stepmother, Mary Craig, died at the same time, 1668, possibly of the plague. He was 14. It is said in 1670, at 16 years of age, John ran away from his uncle's home, where he was living in Devon, England. He made his way to the docks in Bristol, England, where he stowed away on a ship bound for New England. You know, that's like a crazy story. That's what I was saying. Maybe it was planned, like he actually went as an indentured servant or kidnapped. When he was found 3 days later, he was ordered to work as a cabin boy. Once he made it to Plymouth, he had to work for 5 years to pay off his passage. Like I said, that's indentured servitude. So they're trying to make up the fact that he wasn't a slave, because, you know, that's literally a servant. They don't want to say literally that he was a servant, that he was an orphan. So, okay, but we know what this means. This is indentured servitude. He was a servant. In 1676, he became a Quaker, married Dorothy Allen. We have all this, and fathered 9 children. The birth records from Dartmouth, Massachusetts show children of John and Dorothy as Colvin, Anna, John Jr., Stephen, Abigail, Samuel, Anne, Deborah, James, a Baptist minister, and Joshua. John Jr. and Samuel changed back to the spelling of Calvin. So it says his wife's Dorothy Allen's father, Matthew Allen, one of the founders of the Quaker Church in Sandwich, Mass. When pressure on the Quakers ramped up there in about 1665, he and all the Quakers moved to Dartmouth, Massachusetts. Dorothy Allen is descended from King Edward III of England. All right. So that's probably a line, you know, I haven't even gone up, but you see, it's going to end up in King Edward III. So John Colvin, again, born in Scotland, the very first bringing the name to New England, ended up literally in Plymouth. So again, we got here through his son, Stephen Colvin, right? Now going up, John Colvin, again, the parents were William and Janet Miller, or Mueller, right? She passed away early. And William also passed away with his next wife. William's parents, James Colvin, all right? And he's from Edinburgh, Midlothian, Scotland, 1584. Passed away there. He brought definitely he made it popular there in Scotland. His wife Marion Ware, and now his parents, David John Colvin. Look at this, born in Geneva, Switzerland. That's where John Calvin's people, his dad was before they went to France, and this guy brought the Colvin line to Glasgow, Scotland, and that's actually historic. The whole history of the Colvins going from Geneva to Scotland, or Huguenots or Protestants, Sephardic Jews, cryptos going from there to Glasgow, Scotland. His wife, Barbara Kirsterson, and again, David is the son of Antoine, brother of John Calvin. You see, Noyon, Picardy, France, 1513, that's where they were. Here's his brother, John, the crypto.jew, MOORISH Jew, Calvin, Cohen, the reformer, Calvinism. The Huguenots followed him, remember? He was born 1509, and their dad, Gerard, all right, the one born in France, it says here in 1454, Gerard Jacquemin Calvin or Calvin, and the mom, Jean Van Couteren Lefranc Calvin. All right, now you guys see the genealogy. Just want to show you guys something again, going back to the book. The Calvin Family's Origin and History of the American Calvins with a Partial Genealogy by Claude W. Calvin. Seventh generation from John Calvin at Dartmouth, Massachusetts. So he would know because he's a descendant of the same John Calvin that the Fredenberg Menominee Indians are descendants from. And again, going into the John Calvin of Dartmouth, which we already saw, that's their ancestor, the same one we just saw in the tree. And again, they were saying they didn't know the parents here, but that he had a guardian had been appointed for him. You know, that was his uncle, who he supposedly ran away from. So as therefore pointed out, if he did in fact come from Glasgow, and he did, remember we just proved it in his genealogy, he may have been a descendant of one of the early Calvin refugees at Geneva. He was. Some of whom it is believed may have gone to Scotland prior to 1600. They did, as these Geneva Calvins included Samuel and David Calvin, nephews of John Calvin, the reformer. Our Plymouth-bound cabin boy may have been descendant of one of these sons of Antoine Calvin. All right, younger brother of the great reformer himself. All right, we got the whole genealogy that's showing that. Here is David. Again, born in Geneva, he brought it over to Scotland, right? Over his son James Colvin had changed his name, but his son William had changed it back to Calvin, who is the dad of John Calvin, who ended up in Dartmouth. Again, who was the ancestor of the Fredenberg families, the Menominee Indians, the husband of Alice Cecilia Oshkosh, the princess, right, of the Menominee. These are their European Calvinist ancestors, the actual creators, Sephardic Jews, though, right? Crypto Jews. Can you believe that? The Fredenbergs, do they know? They might descend from possible melanated folks, so-called black folks, crypto Jews, Moors. Do they know that? Would they even accept that? Well, that's what I'm seeing here. And, you know, that's where I'm going to leave it, guys, so you guys can see. I didn't make this up. This is what it's showing. You can verify this genealogy if you like. So I hope this video was informative. I just wanted to show you, since these were recent topics, we just did her tree and we just did John Calvin. I didn't think it was going to connect like this. Pretty crazy how the stories connect. As you guys can see, you never know what you're going to find when you're doing genealogy. You never know who your ancestors are. What are you going to connect? And it's just crazy that these two stories connected, as you guys can see. All right. This was a great example. Whether you liked it or not, I'm not sure, but I hope it was informative for some of you. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Wow.